Welcome our webcast viewers. As well, we welcome OTN viewers. Today we have reached a milestone as we can now broadcast these seminars to the Ontario Telehealth Network sites. The first OTN site to participate is Cambridge Hospital. So welcome to our friends in Cambridge. And Cambridge, please bear with us if there are any technical glitches here. A special thank you to our seminar series sponsors, Borden Ladner Gervais, McKesson, Healthcare Information Management and Communications Canada, and Smart Systems for Health Agency. I have looked forward to this day for some time. This is the inaugural seminar of the Why Not series of the Smarter Health seminars. As you know, the University of Waterloo is celebrating its 50th anniversary this year. Our 2007 Smarter Health Seminar Series is dedicated to the university's anniversary slogan, The Spirit of Why Not. This series will celebrate our past, but more importantly, it will look ahead and plan for our future related to health informatics, ideas, and innovations. It will look at questions such as, why not use the promise of information and communications technology to improve health and healthcare in Canada? Why not rethink how we provide healthcare? Why not do more to make it possible to receive healthcare at home or in the community? As we planned this series, we wanted someone extra special to kick the series off, and the obvious choice was Dr. Jake Thiessen, the director of our new Health Sciences campus and our new School of Pharmacy. Following Jake, we have a cast of stars who will be part of the series, including Mr. Tom Clausen, Senator Michael Kirby, Dr. Brian Haynes, Dr. Jeff Fong, Dr. Octo Barnett, and Dr. Vimla Patel, who will be our next speaker. Our agenda today is as follows. David Johnson, President of the University of Waterloo, will introduce our speaker. Then Jake will speak for about 45, 50 minutes. And we ask you to hold your questions until after Jake's presentation. The reason for this is that we'd like to get the mic to you so that you can speak your question to the mic so that our web viewers and the video conference people can hear. And for those that are participating by the web, please send in your questions to us so that we can get our speaker to answer those as well. So now, without any further ado, please welcome David Johnson.
Let me say three things in introducing Jake, including an introduction of Jake himself, a very good friend of mine. First of all, the theme of the 50th anniversary of this university, Why Not? The words are what come from a play of George Bernard Shaw, which would be, almost 100 years ago. The play's words are set in they are and wonder why. We dream of things that ought to be and ask why not. And that's a wonderful statement for a very innovative university. The first line of the couplet, some people see things as they are and wonder why, is what we're all about as a university. We're constantly reviewing, analyzing, searching through new truth, that relentless curiosity. But the second part of the couplet really applies to the University of Waterloo. We dream of things that ought to be, and that's why not. First of all, it's dreaming, it's thinking in bold and adventuresome fashion. Secondly, it has a moral imperative, ought to be. There's a value component there. And then there is that innovative spirit, why not? Let's get on with it. And I think it's very appropriate for our 50th anniversary and this series of lectures. I'm so pleased that Jake is here to kick it off. Jake is the director, the founding director, the Hallman director of our School of Pharmacy, which will open its doors in January 8th. He's also the director of our Health Science campus located in downtown Kitchener. When we embarked 7 years ago on increasing our footprint in health, we said we will do so as a university because of the social and economic importances of health to our society and the world society, and because of the extraordinary intellectual capital requirements involved in doing important things in health, and we will do so in fields of health where we will bring some considerable strength that we already have to the table. And what we bring to this particular exercise is computational mathematics in an enormous degree. That venture into further steps in health brought about a school of pharmacy because of a very innovative plan of the City of Kitchener and more recently the Regional Council of Waterloo that has brought McMaster's Satellite Medical School here to our community, and that will open about the same time. And now to Jake. You have a CV in front of you. He's a graduate of the University of Manitoba, PhD from the University of California at San Francisco. A number of important achievements, including as Associate Dean of the Faculty of Pharmacy at the University of Toronto, seeing through a major building project and expansion of their program. And then when we struck the agreement with the University of Toronto to establish the second School of Pharmacy in the province, coming to us as our leader and bringing with that this wonderful richness of collaboration with Canada's largest School of Pharmacy. His own area of interest is pharmacokinetics, and his topic today is entitled, "Why Not Bring Medications and Their Use Out of the Dark Ages?" But an interesting title, and he speaks about average medicine for the average Joe in the average situation, that is moving from the broad population and from the average to the individual and the customized, and how important is computational mathematics to do precisely that. Individualized medicine, pharmaceuticals that are directed to the particular person with that particular person's makeup. When you think about steps, advances in health science, that one is really breathtaking if we can bring it about. And I can't imagine a better person to talk to you today about it than my friend Jake Thiessen. Jake, over to you.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much, David. It's a delight to have met so many wonderful friends, new friends at the University of Waterloo, and to be engaged in this terrific project bringing a School of Pharmacy here. I may, however, go down as the fellow that actually brought drugs to UW. As an outline for my talk today, I want to begin with the concept of identity. Thereafter, I'd like to weave for you a tapestry of the world of medicines. I will take and do a kind of a pixelated stop at selected areas in order to give you some more in-depth view of this. And I'm going to emerge out of this with a concept around identity that's rather different from the one that I began with. Don't be surprised if in the course of this I give you information about the world of medicines that you may not have had before. But the other thing is you may also find that I have some fairly strong views as to where things are wrong and where things ought to be going. If there is such a thing as a subtitle that expresses what my thesis is, it is this one. It is that therapeutic enlightenment by harnessing comprehensive identity. So, who am I? Well, as David often wants to introduce me, I'm a Mennonite. I am the grandson of a preacher, the grandson of a lady who was a midwife, who developed a variety of therapies for her community in Russia and in Canada. I'm a first-generation Canadian. I am a son of a farmer who turned into a businessman to lead a construction company where I learned how to pour concrete. I am the son of a mother who prays for me every day. I am the father of two, a husband of one, a grandfather of three. That is who I am. But of course, those kind of things don't count when you get to the border. And I just noticed this flash across my computer screen, which says there's an obligatory identity that's going to be necessary by various kinds of people. And of course, there I am. That's my obligatory identity. And there's another one that's coming that is probably even more defined, we would say, or perhaps even more robust, and that it has to do with irises. Now, of course, that doesn't matter in healthcare, does it? Because in healthcare, there's another world of identity that we need to recognize and appreciate. There's an identity that expresses me as, in demographic terms, my height, my weight, my surface area, my gender, just a variety of features. There's naturally a genetic identity. There's an anatomical identity, a structural identity. And in fact, some of the people that I've met in engineering are working on structural concepts related to the human body. Organizational identity that is absolutely profound. Of course, there's cultural identity, spiritual identity, emotional identity, and the role of the emotions in the world of identity is very powerful. If you've never read a series of books by James Lynch around the heart, entitled particularly The Broken Heart and The Language of the Heart, two books that I've read, it is astounding what the heart tells you. In fact, very silently, my heart is exhibiting traits that is changing my physiology rather dramatically, even at this very moment. In fact, this emotional impact is so strong that in the area of therapeutics can actually override beta blockers, which are typically used to control some of these features. But the who I am actually extends beyond that into the world of physiology, chronology, hormonal influences, cyclical, electrical, chemical, biochemical, etc. It's fascinating when in the dead of night, when there is no tyranny of noise, you suddenly become aware of your physiology. You're aware of this marvelous thing called heartbeat, blood pumping. Astoundingly, in a lifetime, 10-foot by 10-foot container, 10 miles high, is what this heart pumps. Strikingly, while you're lying there, imperceptibly, 300,000 cells of the gastrointestinal tract are turning over every second. Billions and trillions of chemical reactions. In fact, we are awash in chemistry. We are awash in chemistry that actually resides in one of the most remarkable chemical fluids on Earth, water. Not long ago, I visited with an eminent scholar, and we talked about the world of chemistry. And in the course of the conversation, he said to me, "Jake, I believe I am simply the sum of biochemical reactions." Some of us might poo-poo that idea, but frankly, what is gastrointestinal rumbling? What is a heartbeat? What is control of pH? What is emotion? What is thinking? What is perception? Is it not, in many ways, the expression of the world of chemistry that describes each of us? If we assemble all of this, it's easy to talk about our bodies as really a set of force vectors. There are a host of intrinsic force vectors that I've identified here, ranging from chemical, biochemical, through a myriad of other kinds of forces. And yet, this isn't the only part that describes who we are. There is an environmental role that we see played in innumerable ways, and ultimately the composite of all of this is part of the identity. In fact, it's sometimes surprising how we disregard the very nature of this intrinsic environmental amalgam that expresses who we are. We're pulsating, we're changing, we're vibrating, we're reacting. Many things are happening, and we're certainly not static. As a matter of fact, in the world of healthcare, I'm shocked sometimes how much people spend time absolutely linked to their biochemical values after a test, because that set of biochemical values is but a snapshot in time and hardly reflects who we are as people. So who am I? I'm certainly not fixed or constant. I'm an individual who reflects the complicated interaction between intrinsic and environmental forces. I'm surprisingly elastic. In fact, as I gain weight, amazingly, my skin goes with me. As I lose weight by a variety of programs, amazingly, the skin comes back. I'm amazingly homeostatic. There's an innate tracking towards a prescribed harmony wherein the vector sum of all intrinsic and environmental forces adds up to 0. A very engineering concept. Going back to my spiritual roots, Psalm 139 and 14 says, I am fearfully and wonderfully made. I'd like to turn the focus somewhat to the chemistry again, because in essence, the world of medicines is a world of chemistry. Clearly, there is a significant component to our chemical environment. Many of us say there are beneficial versus harmful medicines or chemicals or environmental toxins. There's a world of natural versus synthetic. I'm intrigued by the focus these days on natural. It is shocking that people are not interested in the pure. In fact, I can remember when I was a pharmacist, people coming to see me, and they would ask for rose hips. And I would say to them, I can give you vitamin C as the pure material. Oh, I don't want that. I want the natural. It's like saying, it's better to swallow a whole cow than get insulin. Let me illustrate the dangers that people encounter with this kind of thinking. Perfectly illustrated through the work of a friend of mine at Sunnybrook Medical Center in the area of St. John's Wort. If you don't know it, very popular material used to, as it were, pick you up mentally. They analyzed 54 U.S. and Canadian products. They discovered that using validated analytical methods, employing pure materials that could become the reference, they found that the content ranged anywhere between 0 and 108% of content for capsules. For tablets, you can see the numbers, and for tinctures, anywhere between 0 and 118 micrograms per mil. Only 2 of the products actually had content that was within 10% of their label claim. On average, most of the products' labels way overestimated the actual content. Nobody is watching this world. Nobody is making sure that these things are authentic. And yet people clamor for the natural, and I think it's a paradox. My wife just pointed to me this weekend this article, which was in Good Housekeeping. It tells the tragic tale of a woman who wanted to, again, take a pick-me-upper called Kava Kava. She took it for a period of time, began to experience a variety of blood disorder problems. Ultimately, she had to have a liver transplant. And she said, why is this stuff on the market? Well, there's a snapshot of the idea of natural. There are other categories we could use. Essential versus optional. Endogenous versus foreign. Self-selected versus prescribed. And of course, there is an entire world of nutritional. Dare I say that the world of chemicals is a continuum. The medicinal world is not, as it were, some sort of a specialized, segregated community of chemicals. It is something that we have created through regulatory requirements, in part driven by an industrial world. But ultimately, these molecules really just join the spectrum of things that we all consume. In light of that, you may understand perhaps why things developed the way they did in the world of medicines. Here's a quote from Grolier's Multimedia Encyclopedia, which states, "Ancient humans have experimentally sampled many kinds of plants in their search for nourishment. Plants that were palatable were used for food. Those with toxic or unpleasant effects were kept for their neighbors." No, they were avoided and used against enemies. Others that produce physiologic effects such as perspiration, defecation, healing, and hallucination. And incidentally, that was known a long time ago. These were saved for medicinal purposes and divination. Over a period of thousands of years, people learned to use a variety of plants as medicines for different ailments. The world of pharmaceuticals has its origin in the natural world. I want you to understand that. In fact, if you take account of all the medicines that we have, clearly 50 to 60% of them have their distinct origin in the natural world, in the plant world. Let me tell you the story of aspirin, a popular thing that we all know. It goes back in history to at least 400 BC, where Hippocrates actually identified it as something to use for pain and fever relief. What they did is they took the bark and leaves of the willow tree, they placed them in water for a period of time, and then they actually consumed this as it were a tea. In 1832, so it took literally hundreds of years before a German chemist experimented with salicin and created salicylic acid as a purification out of the willow tree leaves and bark. This salicylic acid nowadays is actually well known. It's used continually, at least as a wart remover, because it is acidic. It's actually very caustic. Felix Hoffmann in 1897, who was a chemist at Bayer, the chemical company that many of us know, and we recognize it as the maker of the authentic aspirin, he had a father who had rheumatism and was interested in helping him. Realized, of course, because his father tried salicylic acid, that it was rather caustic and it caused all kinds of gastrointestinal upset. So he embarked upon a project to modify this thing and ultimately made the molecule we call acetylsalicylic acid, or aspirin. In 1899, Bayer began to distribute this to physicians, and in 1915, aspirin became available without a prescription, an over-the-counter medication. In 1948, Dr. Lawrence Craven actually noticed something unusual. This was, in some ways, one of the early studies in epidemiology, and discovered to amazement that men who had been prescribed aspirin hadn't suffered from heart attacks. It took not that long, 32 years roughly, and the FDA approved aspirin for a drug to reduce the risk of strokes. Continuing with the story, in 1982, Dr. John Vane, a British pharmacologist, received the Nobel Prize for showing that aspirin acts by inhibiting prostaglandin synthesis. There's been a continual refinement in the knowledge as to what willow bark was really doing in some ways, and in particular, in this case, the molecule we know as aspirin. In 1985, the FDA approved aspirin to prevent heart attacks. And in 1996, the FDA, a directive actually came out. FDA, by the way, is the Food and Drug Administration, which said, use aspirin if you suspect a heart attack. Every fellow over the age of 50 should likely be taking aspirin. I'm certainly on it. In fact, if you have any kind of problems like this in your genetic history, carrying aspirin with you wherever you go is not a bad idea, because when you feel that chest pain, there's probably no better thing to take. It was also discovered that as a byproduct that colon cancer was actually inhibited because of the use of aspirin, particularly in people with rheumatic disease, the rheumatism diseases. And then an interesting development occurred. People began to discover that aspirin seemingly wasn't doing such a good job. Well, why was it not doing a job like it was supposed to? Well, apparently there are a collection of individuals for whom the conventional dose of aspirin is not enough. And so a company in Denver has created a test called Aspirin Works, which allows you to figure out whether you are one of these individuals that requires a different dose, a tailored dose to make sure that you gain from its benefits. Well, this has opened up a whole field of molecules. All of these COX-2 inhibitors, they call them, which include the Vioxx that we know so well from all the news reports, actually has its origin in willow bark because it became just a simple molecular modification from the basic salicylic acid structure. So this gives you an overview of how the natural world has given rise to the synthetic world. A variety of companies have been started. Bayer was certainly in the business, and Eli Lilly is another one, and it's a remarkable story of a man who had a passion to make a difference in his world. He was a pharmaceutical chemist, it was Colonel Eli Lilly, who was frustrated with ineffective medicines and wanted to make a difference, so he decided to get rid of all these hucksters that seemed to be out there in force. Actually, sometimes they were preachers on Sunday and hucksters the rest of the week. He wanted to develop molecules of the highest quality, employing the best science, and the company was launched in 1876. The regulatory requirements around medicines actually has a relatively short history. It wasn't until 1906 that Teddy Roosevelt actually pushed through a law that led to the Food and Drugs Act, which would ensure that there was some sort of consistency and purity around food laws. This law, the Food and Drug Act, actually became, as it were, the prescription, ultimately, for what has unfolded in the development of modern medicines. And I want to tell you a wee bit about the drug development process, because I think it's instructive as to whether some of these things, in fact, can be trusted. Most everything, including work that is done here in the discovery area in a variety of centers, begins with the world of discovery. Test tube work, typically, that ultimately defines precisely what might happen in the body. Then there is a world of preclinical work that includes all kinds of analytical things and ultimately animal testing. Some of it short and some of it long term. An application is made right here once that data is finished to either Canada or the US, and a series of clinical studies are launched. I'm actually pleased to tell you today that our first person that we hired, Dr. Mariana Foldvari, has a company. She's wanting to bring the company to Waterloo region, and her molecule that she's working with, or her product with the company, is right about there, Mariana, in the clinical trials program. Thereafter, once the sufficient clinical tests are done, and I'll tell you a little more about that in a moment, it actually gains approval if sufficient evidence is gathered, and it can move on to a world of post-marketing surveillance and use in the wider community. It looks like not a particularly onerous thing of getting a new product or new molecule to market, but let me tell you, it's very difficult. The time to development typically is something like this. The preclinical discovery period is 4 to 6 years. The clinical development period is 5 to 7 typically, and the review of the entire documentation is somewhere in the 1 to 2 year period, leaving you a total of 12 years, roughly, on average, for a molecule to move from discovery all the way up to market approval. What are some of the drug development strategies? Well, I'll tell you frankly that companies are in it for a variety of reasons, but mostly they want to try to make some money. And so one of the things many companies are championing is the idea of exclusivity for a wide array of patients. They would love to be the only player in the game. So large targeted patient population. If you have hundreds of millions of people who require a particular product, well, that's good for business, obviously. They want to minimize risks. They want to make sure that their drug is safe. They want it to be efficient. as efficient as possible. So the concept of one size fits all makes a lot of sense. They'd like the entire thing to be efficient in production, simple in prescribing, and just a variety of other features. Now, with this kind of backdrop to the world of medicines, what are some of the benefits of this system of development? Well, frankly, all of this regulated system actually is really quite good. It provides a sense of standardization. Objective testing of the discoveries. It's not the hucksters that can allow that will present products to the population. There's a historical inventory of information that is gathered. There's evidence around authenticity and purity of pharmaceuticals. Incidentally, just as a quick aside, I'm delighted to be able to work with some people from the electrical engineering community. And one of the things we were able to get was the CFI grant that ultimately is working on a variety of fronts, including the pharmaceutical front. We're hoping that, in fact, some of the work that we will do will allow us to pick up counterfeits non-destructively, counterfeit tablets, capsules, etc. And I'm very excited to be able to work with the team. There are rigid manufacturing controls that are part of all of this, so that there's consistency, they are stable, and they're just an entire world there. That everything that is developed by patients and within patients is under ethical control, and ultimately there's a control on the rhetoric. Only so and so much advertising can be allowed. It's got to be evidence-based, and all of that is controlled. What is a success rate? This gives you a list of the fall-offs that occur as molecules wend their way through this procedure. And so over this period of 12 years, ultimately what you find is maybe at the beginning you've screened somewhere between 5,000 and 10,000 molecules, but ultimately out of that group, only one actually makes it to the market. So there's a huge attrition rate. And how much does all of this cost? Well, roughly, the cost of bringing a molecule to market is something approaching $1 billion. This is not chump change. You need deep pockets to be able to do this. If you have a molecule over here and you're thinking, I've got a discovery, I'm going to make this into something that is good for people, let me tell you, you're going to have a lot of good friends in order to be able to do that, unless you have pockets that other people don't have. Let me move on to another part of this tapestry. What is the overall impact of medicines on society? Well, there have been a lot of leading benefits for this world of medicines. Obviously, antibiotics have been a godsend, helping to actually rid mankind of numerous diseases when they've had them. Who cannot but remember family members that have been either hit with post-surgical infections or perhaps kidney infections, just a variety of things. Heart drugs that have changed the outcome of people. Anti-cancer drugs, for example, testicular cancer. Terrific success story by the use of anti-cancer molecules. Breakthroughs in asthma treatment that have revolutionized the life of people. Pain-relieving medicines. We've talked a little bit about aspirin. But there's a whole world of pain-relieving medicines that has brought relief to people. Revolutionary discoveries that have permitted successful transplants. You cannot do transplants with other people's body parts unless you have drugs that can deal with that kind of a situation. If you don't have those, there are no transplants. And just a numerous or a variety of other kinds of situations that this world of pharmaceuticals has solved. And there have been all these kind of studies. Here's one from PricewaterhouseCoopers that describes the impact on death rate by the use of pharmaceuticals over a period of time. And they point to the reduction in death rates as a result of these. So these are some of the outcomes that we would call the positive outcomes of pharmaceuticals. And now let's let's turn the table a bit and say, are there disappointments? Well, there are a variety of unhappy outcomes. Unfulfilled promises, particularly the world of unsuccessful treatments, and I'll give you a perspective on that. A lot of trial and error experimentation. You're on this, you're on that, you're on 2 of them, you're on 5 of them, and it still doesn't work. In fact, people came to me early on in my tenure here and said, I've got this problem, is there anything you can do to help me with that? High incidence of adverse reactions. It is estimated that the cost to U.S. society of these adverse effects to medicine is something in the order of $100 billion a year U.S., and it costs over around 100,000 lives a year, directly attributable to the consumption of medications. Very unhappy. A worrying multiplicity of treatments, notably in the elderly. I'm delighted that somehow this School of Pharmacy is going to be working with the Research Institute on Aging and the geriatric population in a defined setting to try to see if we can make a difference in the whole matter of medication use in the elderly. Of course, there's the troubling cost in paying for medications, an alarming escalation in drug budgets, and just a variety of other things. In fact, if you look at the ineffective outcomes of a variety of medications, what you see is something like this, that for hypertension drugs, that is those to lower blood pressure, there is this is the patients can respond differently. This is the percentage of failure, and you can see here the failures that are encountered in a variety of drug categories, cholesterol-lowering drugs, anti-asthmatics, the variety of them. If you kind of do a cut through all of this, you come up with a number around 50%. In fact, if you ask many people in the know, what is the failure rate of the use of medications? Very often people come up with the number 50%. Is it any wonder that with this kind of unsuccessful treatment program that often is used by patients, that they clamor for other things? Because it's almost like flipping a coin. Well, what about the entire matter of concern about expenditures? Here are some numbers that define through Statistics Canada what is being paid for various kinds of healthcare related services. The overall expenditures in 2004 is something in the order of $130 billion in our country. A variety of components to that. The drugs prescribed and non-prescribed, you'll notice, represents an expenditure of approaching $22 billion. In fact, if you look at the numbers more currently, it's about $25 billion in our country. The prescribed drugs are a certain fraction of that. The non-prescribed are an additional fraction. What is the component of medication costs to the overall health expenditure? Oops. You'll notice here that the numbers have been increasing to reach about 17%. About 70% of our health care budget goes to the use of medications. Now, some people say that's tragic, that is out of proportion. And I would say that is a false view of it, as much as the data describes a very bleak picture. The reason being, if you use a drug like ciprofloxacin, an antibiotic, you can actually keep a person out of hospital. What was ordinarily a 7-day stay in the hospital to treat an infection, people are doing it at home. Yes, it costs money, but you're saving yourself thousands of dollars in hospital costs. So there is a world here that hasn't been entirely reconciled, and in part, there's a very siloed mentality about the way healthcare expenditures actually unfold. How have we been doing to the rest of the world? Here's a picture of various nations with time, and you'll notice here in 1985, we're expending about 10% of our healthcare budget on medicines, and right now we're up about 17%, but we're somewhat short of a variety of countries, but ahead of others. So there is concern about expenditures. Another question people often ask is, why are medicines sometimes withdrawn due to catastrophic outcomes? Well, in part, one needs to understand the nature of drug testing. The testing that is required for regulatory purposes actually involves a variety of patients, and you'll notice in 1994-95, the average was something in the order of 4,200 patients that are actually tested with the drug. That number has now increased so that at the present time, it's somewhere in the 6,000 to 7,000 patients are tested. And if you think about this number statistically, what is the probability that at least one serious adverse event will surface in the course of testing those 6,000, 7,000, 8,000 patients? Well, the number is such that if the incidence of an adverse effect, for example, if it is 1 in 100,000, if that's the incidence, you're never going to see it in that trial. The likelihood is essentially 0. Yes, if it's 1 in 100, then if you're working with 3,000 or even 6,000, there's a 100% chance you'll see it. The fact that molecules are withdrawn from the market is not because they're necessarily inherently bad or that the company somehow is trying to hide something, the common perception. It's that the probability of actually seeing something is almost 0 with these serious effects. Well, now to the topic, dark ages. Why is the pharmaceutical business in the dark ages? Well, I believe in part it's because there is the mentality of one size fits all to optimize efficiency. It is geared to mass production. There is the expectation of a silver bullet. I think we've got this grandiose idea that we're going to find one chemical and it'll solve all of mankind's problems. And that's totally false based upon common and fairly elementary physiology and biology. There's a sense of dumbed down molecules. What do I mean? They try to make sure that the molecules themselves don't pose any particular risks, and it would be better to err on the side of safety than the aggressive molecules that really do something. So there's a lot of dumbing down that goes in the discovery stage. Dogmatic attitudes, rigid regulatory system, a lot of things that express a world that is far less than ideal. Sir William Osler, who is sometimes thought to be the Canadian father physician, wrote, "Medicine is a science of uncertainty and an art of probability." It doesn't surprise you, given what I've told you, that that's the viewpoint. Is there enlightenment? Can we do something to reduce the unhappy outcomes? Are there potential solutions? My central tenet, and that of others, is this. One-size-fits-all thinking is at the heart of the problem. There's only one solution, I feel, and that is personalized treatment in dealing with people. What do I mean by personalized? Personalized entails comprehensive identity, optimized treatment based upon that identity, and feedback monitoring. Well, the idea of customization or individualization is nothing new. We build custom homes. There's a lot of things we do in our world of custom clothing. We even have customized food for our pets, customized jeans. There's all kinds of things that are customized. I was intrigued by a paper that was found in Comprehensive Reviews in Food Science that talked about actually customer-centric and individualized aroma science and the world of flavors, and trying to build something that the average person, the individual average person, likes. After reading it, I was kind of intrigued by the fact that they overlooked the entire role that medicines plays in this. Because interestingly, one of the byproducts of medication use very often is that it affects the receptors in our sensing system. And that includes our taste buds, sense of smell, etc. It's well known that rheumatoid arthritic patients that are on Anti-inflammatory drugs very often no longer want to eat certain vegetables because they don't taste good anymore. The relationship between medications and sensing. Well, the response to medications involves a variety of things. There's a world in which medications, of course, are circulating in the body. There's a world of thermodynamic principles, etc., that govern some of this. But ultimately, what has to happen is the drug must cross barriers, reach some kind of a receptor area where a response occurs, and it is this world that ultimately defines the response of medications. People are different. Some of the responses are genetically based, and some of them are simple scale problems and environmental factors. What is probably not entirely appreciated is that the world of response here is one in which if you don't get enough drug, the response is inadequate. If you get too much drug, the response is excessive. For example, if you are taking a pain reliever, and if you don't get enough medication, you don't get adequate pain control. But if you take too much of these narcotics, ultimately you get respiratory failure and you get death. It's all part of a continuum of treatment. Let me illustrate it practically. Here's some data where a standard dose of an anti-epileptic drug out of this location was given to a host of individuals. Ordinarily, one would expect this to be the requirement for the dose on the basis of body weight. Look at the variation using a standard dose of this drug, 300 milligrams per day. Where is the therapeutic window for response? It is right here. This is the accepted range in which your concentrations should lie. Look at the number of individuals who actually have levels that are toxic and those that are subtherapeutic. It is estimated that for this medication, for a relatively serious condition, about 70% of patients do not get the right treatment using the one-size-fits-all strategy. In order to understand how then to treat people, the important thing is to understand the realm of intrinsic and environmental factors that ultimately define who each one of us is. Well, if we're going to develop something that is effective, that is individualized or personalized, we must do something that reduces trial and error, and the tailoring could involve something that includes our genomic traits and other factors. It is something that must ultimately involve a sense of biodiagnostics if we're going to make any headway in individualizing treatment, and it must entail a slew of skill and capability in bioinformatics. If you're going to optimize pharmacotherapy based upon this world of intrinsic and extrinsic or environmental factors, the fundamental logic is this. First of all, you may need to make sure you've got the right patient you're treating. You need to have the right identity. You must have the most appropriate drug or drugs for that individual in the correct context. And correct context, there are many cases where you don't use that drug. You need the optimal dose, the correct pharmaceutical product. Drugs come in a variety of products, from rectal to sublingual to intravenous to oral. The appropriate route, the correct dosing schedule, using effective communication, telling people the right things to do, achieving the best compliance, and making the right outcome assessment. This does not take an ordinary person to accomplish this. You need, and the analogy I've suggested, you need a chemical quarterback that knows how to do this. Or another analogy is you need a conductor of an orchestra that can put all of this together. I personally think that the world of genetics has its risks. It has some huge upsides. Some of the great success stories that have been identified recently, one happens to be with the human epidermal epidermal growth factor receptor that is found in an overexpressed form in some women, and so the whole world of a Herceptin has emerged. Their genetic information has been particularly helpful. But there are things here that influence the function of the human such that they tend to override, or in some cases actually change the perception of the genetic constitution. Let me just give you an example. One of them here is infection. Going back to the anti-epileptic drug phenytoin, fascinating story of people who have gone through troubling therapy because of an infection. What happens very often with a viral infection, you actually get a depression of the enzymatic activity in the liver, something that is not genetically defined. The story goes that very often such patients actually have problems in their gait. They think it's something to do with their viral condition, but it's not. It's actually a toxic manifestation of the drug. Why is that so? The drug is not being less easily removed from the body in an viral state, and there's an accumulation of the drug to toxic levels. Then they go and see their physician and say, oh, I've got this problem. The physician says, oh, let me get your levels, get the levels, only to discover their Dilantin levels or the phenytoin levels are elevated. So he says, change the treatment. So they change the treatment, reduce the treatment. So meanwhile, the person recovers from the viral episode, and then what happens in viral conditions, very often thereafter you start getting a return, of course, and as a compensation, there's actually an overshoot that occurs in many of the enzymatic activities. So what actually happens is the body now gets rid of the drug more readily, the levels go down, and the person starts having seizures. And they go through this sequence of events from toxicity to toxicity, and nothing really is working properly. And little wonder they get disappointed. The understanding of the realm of environment with genetic is going to be critical. I propose to you that optimizing therapy requires supporting technology. I'm looking forward to having a vehicle with some of these 50 sensors so my wife can park it a little more easily. I propose to you that there is a world of diagnostics that's going to be very important in pharmacotherapy. OK, back from IBM here, and I've spent entirely too much time aboard this thing that we call the 767. There are 117 miles of electrical wiring in a 767-300. I'm told that there are about 10,000 sensors on such an aircraft. These sensors are in part signature sensors, and in part they're flight monitoring control sensors. The body has trillions of sensors in it. Cells have all kinds, and we're composed of trillions of cells. The concept of sensors is inherent to our survival, and I think it holds a clue for where we're going. What do I propose? The requirement of the future will have biodiagnostic sensors that can accurately, conveniently, and cost-effectively monitor the complex individual identity. Remember, genetics is one thing, but the way that the environment affects a lot of physiologic function tells us that one snapshot will not be enough. The tool of informatics will be there. There'll be pivotal translation of the information ultimately to make decisions that are optimal and individualized. Is such a future possible? Well, I suppose the very fact that I asked the question leads me to believe it, or should lead you to believe that I believe it is. There will be an identity sensor world that will emerge. And we'll give you an example in a moment, which will lead to a kind of analysis. This analysis will be central, it could be inherent to the device, and that will ultimately create a world of decision-making leading to therapy that is individualized for the given situation. In fact, it could be like an aircraft flying which is constantly monitoring the environment. It is not just a dead tool sitting on a runway. And then through a feedback system, feedback loops that engineers are so skilled at developing, the entire thing could ultimately create a much more idealized form of treatment. Here's an example. If you're a diabetic, and Dr. Mariana Folvari has kindly provided these slides for me, there is the opportunity to actually use a device which captures molecules of glucose as they move through the skin from the circulation and hit a sensing device that you wear. So you can be going along daily, and at any instant in time, you know what your blood glucose is. And then I'm delighted to say that Dr. Don Cowan and his son have a company here that I'll show you in a moment that can actually harness that information. But before I go, here's another type of device that was developed by people in Chicago based upon nanotechnology. It's actually a nanocarbon tube. And using this kind of a device and special materials in it, the presence of glucose can actually cause the emission of fluorescence, and this fluorescence can be picked up. They can embed a small tube inside the dermis, and it can actually pick up information regarding your blood sugar. So together you have a sensing device that at any moment in time allows you to know what the blood glucose is of a patient. And then, as I said, Dr. Cowan and his brother, and his son, not his brother, but his son, I'm sorry, have created this company called MycoHealth, which is trying to harness the information that arises from such devices. And you can imagine we're carrying our BlackBerries or our cell phones that are constantly capturing information about who we are, our identity at any moment in time. And this data is dumped at convenient times to a site. That site is controlled ultimately by the patient. The patient dictates or permits individuals who are going to use that for their own benefit. So it goes to a healthcare provider, and the health provider might in fact signal the patient to change the course of therapy. Thereafter, you need some kind of therapy adjustment. And here is a system that describes the ability, using microchip technology, to actually deliver drugs back into the person using a programmed system. So what will happen, there'll be sensing, there will be decision making, the device will be loaded with enough drug, and the device will now deliver the drug to you instead of swallowing a capsule and dealing with the unpredictable world of oral administration. They've demonstrated you can actually create very uniform and consistent levels of drugs as a result of this. I believe this is the direction we need to go. When I said that I was coming to bring a school of pharmacy here, one of the things I wanted to do is see if we could work with a variety of disciplines in this university to actually move this agenda ahead. And the challenge that I've proposed for all of us is that somehow in the course of our fundamental research, the development of technology, and even our educational programs, we make a quantum advance in healthcare certainty in contrast to the Canadian physician statement and the probability of optimal treatment outcomes. Well, I've given you a bit of a landscape journey. I've asked the question, why not bring them out of the dark ages? That is, the medications and their use. I propose to you that there is a future of therapeutic enlightenment, and all we have to do is harness it. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Jake. That was a really thought-provoking talk. I enjoyed it very much, and I'm sure our audience has listened and has many questions to ask. So my colleague Don Cowan is going to help me with this. First, I want to say that my co-host Dominic Covey is not here today. He usually facilitates this discussion after the talk. He sends his regrets. He's participating in a talk in the United States, so he can't be in two places at the same time, at least not yet. So, but he's here with us in spirit, and he also has some questions to ask, so I may slip those in later. But first, let's go to our audience.
Well, Jack, thank you very much for the talk. I enjoyed it very much. Now, you mentioned one thing about the 50% average failure rate of all drugs. Now, what do you mean by that? Can you elaborate it? Because I would think, I take the drug, I have 50% success rate, I'm happy with it. If I don't have, the other side means, bad effect.
Well, thank you, Dr. Puchen. Yeah, the issue of failure, what we do is we do a cut across all of the medication world and ask, how successful really are we? Success, in this case, is defined as the ability to actually either therapeutically solve the problem or somehow address the problem successfully, and so on. Unsuccessful, in this case, would be where you have sufficient toxicity signs that all you do is deal with aggravation the entire time. Or you have unsuccessful treatment, meaning the thing doesn't seem to work. Okay, and there's a change needed of some kind. So taking the unhappy or unsuccessful on the high side, the adverse side, and on the low side, combining all of those two, they represent about 50%, and the success, the happy stuff, is about 50%. So it's almost like a flip of the coin as to whether or not, on average, along the broad cut of medications, you're going to have successful treatment. That doesn't mean that in some restricted areas or narrow areas you have more success. Neither does it mean that at some other areas you might have less success because of just the nature of these kind of medications. I'm not sure if that answers your question, but that's kind of the business that we're in. And part of it, and can I say, that I think a large reason for it is because we're not personalizing. We're trying to use this idea of one size fits all. My friend Dr. Jervis.
Another engineer. Really, your dark ages is what chemical engineers would call open loop control, and your future is closed loop control. And the difference really is in your sensors. And I could have seen the same talk, and I mean this in a very positive way, but the same talk could have been given 20 years ago, because really progress in sensors has been extremely slow, because sticking something into the body is brutal. Right? You put a sensor in there today, and it's not going to measure a thing tomorrow. So how do you see us moving forward when really the challenge is still getting information back into your drug dosing scheme? Do you see progress happening in real sensors that can be implanted, or are we still talking about maybe someday?
I think that in some parts of the world it is already there. I think the whole glucose world that I pointed to and the whole diabetic control of blood sugar is something that's there now. It's ready to be done, and it's moving ahead. There are some areas where it's going to be very different or difficult. Can I say that in some areas, blood pressure control, for example, ought to be very easy. Transducers ought to be able to do those kind of things. In the area of pain, we ought to be able to figure that out. In fact, one of the individuals that we're interested in bringing here from Europe has some terrific equipment and tools to be able to work in the field of pain. We ought to be able to understand a whole lot better how to manage pain, and I think we could probably develop a technology around that. So it is still slow in coming, Eric. Completely agree with that. But there are some places we could already begin right away. There are people that are working in the area of infection who are saying that you can actually figure out infection, at least as seen from the point of the circulation using sensors, and some of that is beginning to develop. So antibiotic treatment, viral treatment, those kind of things might actually come, because when you go for a diagnostic, what do? They take a blood sample from you. They may take a urine sample, but if you can access blood and urine, there's no reason why you can't develop sensors around all of that.
Those don't give real-time feedback for your these are samples taken.
I'm proposing, Eric, that in fact you do real-time monitoring, okay? But what you need is from the sensor, you need to capture that real-time information and download that in real time so that you can then make real-time decisions on therapy. I mean, absolutely.
Right. So, I mean, you need to have sensors that are semi-online.
Correct.
Take a blood sample, process it, and have the patient become the analytical chemist.
Either that or it's on a chip. And all that we do is we link the chip via nanotechnology to the circulation or into the interstitial fluid someplace, and that is the way the chemistry is being done. Like, you know, the idea of having to do chemistry in a laboratory at some remote location for a variety of things is no longer necessary. It's coming. It'll change things.
I believe we have a question from the web.
Yep. Until we are better able to harness this comprehensive identity for individualizing therapy, is any work being done to apply this concept to improving patient adherence to the current one-size-fits-all interventions?
The adherence to it is the focal point is the adherence. Yeah, there are places that are doing a whole lot better than in some of our areas. I recently visited Kaiser Permanente in Denver and was absolutely amazed at the kind of things they're doing there in the area of adherence, for example. They have a whole program on trying to get individuals to actually adhere to treatment protocols, because one of the areas where we find a breakdown in our current system is people are simply they're not conforming to what's best practices for them. So they have a whole program in that area. In terms of medication prescribing, there are some places where individualization can work very well. It does require a skilled chemical quarterback to do this kind of thing, and dare I say, for the pharmacist's benefit in the room, that there are such people that can do that kind of thing. That's illustrated by several people that we all know, including Dr. Jeff Nagy, who is at the Victoria Park School. And he is actually doing this very thing in the area of anticoagulant drug use. He is making a terrific impact on making sure that your blood is thin enough and not too thick.
I think a major problem the pharmaceutical industry has is one of trust, and I think that the distrust is increasing with time. Now, with respect to this idea of having a drug tailored to the individual, even a higher level of trust is required, because there's such potential there for abuse. Let me put this in context. We're in a culture where there's increasing challenges being imploded on us, both from environmental complexity, technological complexity, and the interaction of the two. To deal with this complexity requires more variety to be brought to bear by individuals. Their individual uniqueness can be used certainly to advantage. Unfortunately, you can have organizations that have a limited view and view certain variety as threatening when in effect it's actually to their advantage and they're unable to see that. So you may have individuals who are provided with certain treatments that actually depresses their ability to function, that takes away the opportunity for that variety to be expressed, and as a result it puts all of us at risk. And the greater the threat, the more potential the individual has, the more likely they will be suppressed, if not eliminated. And we've seen things like this happen in other ways in the Soviet Union, as you know, where certain individuals who have been considered problematic have been put in asylums. So this is, I know it's a difficult area to come to terms with, but these are questions that we really need to explore.
Okay, well, I sense that was a comment as opposed to necessarily a question. I know there's a dim view in some circles about the organized world of pharmaceutical product development. Let me tell you, there's some very good people in that entire industry, people who have a passion to make a difference, who face the realities of shareholders. Most of these companies are publicly traded, and the world of shareholders and the pressure that is brought to bear on the organization is something that needs to be understood. But many of them are championing this very idea of personalized medicine. They're very keen about this world, because ultimately it'll be a win-win situation. So I take your comment, but I think that there is a lot of good that is found in this industry.
Thank you very much. It is really intriguing, and I'm very encouraged by your conclusion, especially because the industry is making a lot of progress in terms of integrating, I call it, as you know, the silicon-based electronic machine with chemical-based, carbon-based chemical machine. So like implanting the nanobots or microbots, and then externally signal, the analyzing signal, those things. However, I see there is one problem in the pharmaceutical industry for the personalized medicine. That is, well, we invented the money for the convenience, but human behavior and even thinking process is heavily influenced by money. And then for the pharmaceutical company to develop one drug takes 12 years and $900 million, right? And then if they were to develop a personalized medicine targeted for a small group of people, each pill would have to cost like $100,000. Nobody can afford. Yep. So that's I think, issue we need to address, and I have no idea. Would you comment on that?
Okay, thank you. Okay, yeah, you presented some good points and obviously some challenges. I think that this concept of designer drugs, can I say, drugs that are identified for a small genetic pool of individuals, in the present scheme of things is a non-doable thing. You're absolutely correct. That is not going to work. What I'm proposing, in fact, is not that approach. What I'm saying is, by and large, the way the biology is rather common, but the influential factors are not necessarily common. Maybe the better strategy is to get a reasonable balance between optimal effect with minimal risk, but not outlawing risk, which is what I consider part of the Dark Ages, okay? And rather taking and individualizing that drug to a person, a particular individual, through the technology that I think is either there or coming, mostly coming, I hope. And that technology will monitor individuals and figure out what's optimal for that individual. Flying a 767 from Toronto to Waterloo is one thing. Flying it through a volcano storm is another thing. And flying it where there's a sudden change in stratospheric pressure is another thing. What I think we simply do is have a plane that has all the sensors to make it work, and all the feedbacks to allow you to fly safely. And it is that concept that I'm saying is where I think we need to go.
One. What I just heard, Jake, I'm paraphrasing it because I want to make sure I understand it, is what you're proposing is tweaking the dose, not tweaking the drug, if I can say that.
That's correct.
In other words, people, you'll measure them, monitor them, their physiology is different, so they're going to get a different amount of the drug based on what responses you get back. But we are not at that point where you call them designer drugs, where we can tweak the drug, so to speak, to affect specific things. Have I got that right?
That would be my view. Yeah. Number one, to tweak, I mean, is it conceptually possible to adjust the chemistry of molecules for individuals? Conceptually, it could be done. But that represents N of 1 trials, N of 1 identities, N of 1 uncertainties, and I don't see that as viable, to be honest, especially in a climate. Remember, one of the things we would have to do is abandon the entire regulatory system. That's the first thing we would have to do. Second, we would have to allow a kind of experimental uncertainty that we are not part of at this point. I don't think that's reasonable. I don't think that the world is prepared for that. The concept of individualizing, even for smaller patient groups, the designer groups more, is something that the regulatory agencies are looking at, both in the U.S. and to some small degree in Canada, and certainly in Europe. Canada, by the way, is a small player in the international scene. In case you're wondering, Canada only consumes about 2% of the free world's medicines. So whatever those sales figures are that you saw there, about 25 billion, multiply that by 50, and that's roughly the world's sales of medicines. I don't think so, Don. I think it's the tweaking.
Just a quick question. I think I'm understanding you correctly that you think we should be using the medicines that we currently have. We should use them better or more efficiently than we have in the past by using technology, by using pharmacists or other healthcare practitioners. I'm just wondering who provides the incentive to do that. I think pharmaceutical companies, from a financial perspective, will continue to develop new drugs and probably tailor them more to individuals because that's the way we're going. An example would be monoclonal antibody technology. I'm just wondering who provides the incentive to make better use of the medications that we currently have.
Okay, well, Ryan it was, right? Yeah, Ryan, terrific question. Yeah, the issue of who pays is always a troubling one, isn't it? Clearly, in our healthcare system, ultimately the public purse pays for the lion's share of some of this, and so there would have to be compelling evidence that, in fact, this is a system that makes a difference. Is there growing evidence that such a system works? The answer is yes. I have to say that there are pockets of this world where they're doing a much better job than we are in Canada, in fact, in using medications and controlling them. There's lots of evidence for that. I think the signal in Ontario, for example, with this entire world of cognitive contribution to the well-being of patients, is a signal that this government is even prepared to move in that kind of a direction. So I think that with time you'll see that the public purse will be increasingly interested in this. But I dare say that maybe the greatest impetus for all of this might come from patients. Let me ask you, if you were an epileptic patient and you had two choices for therapy, one in which you had to subscribe to the vagaries of the average person, and another one where you could subscribe to the idealized personal control of your medication, where would you go? Where would you seek? And let me tell you, if your neighbor gets it, you can be sure the other neighbor gets it, and etc. And before you know it, there's considerable public pressure. And I can tell you that when Kaiser Permanente, when I was there recently and asked them, what are some of the reasons why it works in your organization? It's a payer organization. It's an HMO, health management organization. Why does it work? And they said, the number one reason why it works is patient satisfaction. We're doing things that patients find best. They are willing to pay money in order to belong to this organization. The second one was our professionals, our physicians, our clinicians, whatever, they are finding that we lead the nation in our performance. They've got pride associated with it. And you know what? The final one is the administration, which said, you know what? We're doing all of this as a lower cost because of our patients. Our diabetics are not coming in. Our cardiovascular patients are not coming in. We're saving in hospital space and time and all of the costs associated with it. And it's a win-win situation. Can it make a difference and can it actually be demonstrated? Unequivocally, yes.
We're getting close to the end of our time, but I do want to ask one question from Dominic. And we were talking a little bit about the new School of Pharmacy and its rollout, I believe, in 2008, with 100 students coming in?
120.
120 intake students? Yeah, I think you can still apply if you want. Anyway, one of the questions would be, what key skills do you see the pharmacists of the future? What key skills should they have?
I'm going to use the reply that Don's son, was it, or Don's grandson used. I'm too tired. I don't want to answer the question. Tell Dominic that one. The future world of pharmacy is one in which increasingly pharmacists will be called upon not only to be able to communicate exceedingly well with patients and other health professionals, but actually know how to make decisions in the realm of therapy, really good decisions, be informed about the requirements around informatics, how to harness informatics so that you can take sensing information and ultimately build that into a decision tree, whether it is by technology or other. So I see a kind of a shift towards individuals who obviously have skills in informatics and are creative and are wanting to make a substantial difference in our society. Not that many pharmacists at this point aren't, but I think that there's going to be a new league of them who will actually be, in the medical sense, the clinical pharmacologists of our society, the chemical quarterbacks who will make huge decisions. They will need to understand basics, know how to make decisions, do it, lead people, be aware of the world of informatics. Can I say, in the football analogy, they know how to read the playbook, to throw the passes, and will lead the team to victory.
Well, I want to thank everybody for coming here today. It's been an exciting start to our series. Before we end the day, I'll get you out before 4:30, but I do want to give an expression of our thanks to Jake. So, second here. So, here. Hit the bay.
Oh my goodness.
Went line.
Oh my goodness.
Taking it out of the bay.
Oh, thank you. Oh my goodness.
So what Jake is seeing here, maybe you can just describe it yourself, Jake.
Smarter Health seminar in celebration of this, and this is actually a picture of Math Computer Building. Thank you. And it's actually by the artist Robert Myers. Thank you very much. What a keepsake.
Thank you. So thank you for coming again today, and I hope that you'll come to our next seminar, February 28th. It will be Dr. Vilma Patel from Ohio University, and she's going to be speaking on why not a cognitive science approach to understanding clinician-computer interaction. So it'll be a really great talk, and I hope you all come back. Thanks a lot.